think loneliness, which is like the darkness or the absence of connection, and love and connection have, in hindsight, been some of the driving forces in my entire life. If I were to think about my journey with loneliness, I think I grew up as a little bit of a lonely, isolated kid. I was interested in art and design, but I also played sports. I didn't really feel like I fit in growing up. I kind of felt like an outsider. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, where a lot of people who felt that way would come together, but even at RISD, I didn't feel like I fit in there.
Even as a hockey player?
Even as a hockey player at art school, I went to a military private school, and then I went to an art college, and I kind of had a foot in each and not fully and I had maybe issues of authority. I didn't really fit in. It turned out to be a huge benefit to being a tech founder, but of course, who doesn't want to fit in? Growing up, so much of our desire is to belong. Because I think to belong is a deeply human trait. We're tribal. We grew up to be in tribes of 50, 100, 150 people. And to not be part of that tribe and not belong in a prior era would be a death sentence. And I think that ultimately today, we're probably living in one of the loneliest times in human history. If people were as lonely in yesteryear as they are today, they'd probably perish. Because you just couldn't survive without your tribe. And I think that, for me, I didn't realize that this was a thing that I was fighting throughout my life. And so when I was 25, turning 26, I started with my two co-founders, and we became the family. We became a family that I hadn't had for 10 years since I left the house. And then suddenly we were a family, the three of us, and we're just hanging out together. We lived together. We all woke up around the same time, around 8 a.m. We'd work till midnight. And then we'd do it the next day. We'd go grocery shopping together. We'd go to the gym together. It was very communal. Then we hired people that were basically our friends. We wouldn't hire anyone we didn't like. And then we didn't have a lot of work-life boundaries. Everyone was young. We didn't have families. We'd go out drinking together and hang out together and dinner. And that became like a family. It became like a community. And that was incredible. And it was this deep, rich connection. And those were some of the closest friendships I ever had. But then something happens. We go on a rocket ship. And then I go from being a founder to a CEO. And I was one of three founders. And then I became one CEO, an individual role. And as I became a CEO, I started leading from the front at the top of the mountain. But then, the higher you get to the peak, the fewer the people there are with you. And no one ever told me how lonely you would get. And I wasn't prepared for that. And I had this guilt about not working, because so much of my life was about being successful. Probably if I were to dig deep, because I thought that would make people love me, and that was probably adulation, but I probably didn't know it back then. And I probably thought that by being successful, I'd feel really different. And I remember I got to this point where I was already feeling pretty isolated, and then the pandemic happened. And I'm living by myself in a house, and I'm finding myself on Zooms 24/7, 16, 18 hours a day for an entire year of 2020. I, help with the team. We navigate out of a crisis. People were predicting some people were that we would go out of business. We stared into the abyss, and we got in a foxhole. We turned the company around. We took it public. And the day of our IPO, we reached $100 billion valuation. And remember, if you told me $1 million is more money I ever imagined growing up, my parents are social workers. That was an unfathomable amount of money. And I remember after going public, is oh my God, there was this amazing exaltation. It was amazing. I'd gone to the mountain, and then I wake up the next day, and my life is exactly the same. I'm alone. I wake up, I put on sweatpants, I go on to iMac, and I have 10, 12 hours of Zoom meetings, and I just don't really have much of my life outside of work. My work was my life. And then I remember having a 40th birthday party, and I had to make a list of people to invite. And never in my life have I tried to make a list of who my friends are, but when you have to make invitations, you have to make a list. And I made a long list of people. And then I kind of went down the list, and I said, when's the last time I talked to these people? And I realized that almost every single person in the list, if I were to ping, I'd have to catch them up in my life. I couldn't just dive into something, because I had not maintained those relationships. And it was just something that like started, and I started noticing I started feeling more isolated. I would have more negative ruminations and stuff. And I didn't know at the time that I was lonely. I knew I was isolated, but I didn't know that that also meant loneliness. And I thought, I have all these people around me. How could I possibly feel this way? And there were a couple people that like entered my life that like gave me some awareness and consciousness. One at the deeply personal level and one more at the professional level. At the personal level, I ended up actually becoming friends, and a person who became a mentor to mine was the former president of the United States, Barack Obama. And it was like a kind of a crazy story where I like many people met him in the White House, and then we keep in touch after the White House, and he became a bit of a mentor to me. We developed a relationship, and initially it was a purely professional relationship. But by 2021, after we went public, he kind of told me, like, I kind of told him what I was feeling, and he said, I think you're kind of lonely and you probably need to renew friendships. And he described that he had like these 10 or 15 friends. Most of them he was friends with before his presidency, and they kept him grounded and rooted. And your roots come from your past, and your past is often your relationships. Because I kept asking him, like, how didn't you like lose your mind? He's like, it's hard to lose your mind when you have deep connections and relationships to others. And this is around the time I was like totally realized I hadn't maintained relationships. So one of the most important things I decided to do was renew the relationships that were in that invite list, those people that I hadn't really kept in touch with. And so I rekindled relationships with my college friends. And I committed that we'd take like 1 or 2 trips a year. Because the problem is if you don't see your friends, you only text them, the only things you can talk about are like the same old stories from 20 years ago. Or you can talk about other things in your life, but you have no shared experience. In Zoom, in phone calls and text messages are not shared experiences. You can only talk about an experience you had. And so I did that with my college friends. I did it with my high school friends. I started spending more time with my sister and other people in my life. I ended up getting like a dog, a golden retriever named Sophie, Supernova. And the crazy thing, Jay, is I can tell you, like the ride of Airbnb and having all the success and money and power and all this stuff, it can be amazing. I'm not saying it's not amazing, but I actually think it's almost like I had to go on this entire journey to realize I had everything I needed before I even started the journey. That the thing that probably gave me the greatest life satisfaction was a thing that I didn't even need money for, and I didn't even need to have success to achieve. Relationships, many of them I had before I started. As you know, I think you had Robert Waldinger on your show, and I actually met him last week for the first time. He is, as people listening are probably realize, he was a Harvard professor who's run the longest study on human happiness. It started before he was even alive. It's an 85-year study, and the question was, what's the secret of happiness? And of course, I don't think they thought there was a silver bullet answer, and of course it is, and it's relationships. And I think that that's what I've learned, that like, as I've reconnected, I've felt like this light and this love permeate me, and I think it's made me a better leader. Because one of the things Robert told me is 50% of CEOs are lonely. Now, somebody listening say, oh, poor CEOs. Well, I would say, I don't think I want society to be led by a bunch of lonely people.
Exactly.
I don't want society to be led by a bunch of lonely people, because lonely people are less trusting of other people. They're more paranoid. They're less resilient. They will typically have less empathy because they will push people away. I don't think they're as connected. They make worse decisions. And so we do not live in a world where people are lonely. And we especially don't want to live in a world where leaders are lonely. And so this has been one of the defining things in my life. So I think the first part of the answer is for me to deal with my own sense of isolation and loneliness. And again, Jay, I thought loneliness was something that like people's grandparents experienced in their life. I didn't think it was something the young person experiences. And the other person I met is the now and former Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Vivek Murthy. We hired him during the pandemic because a lot of people were afraid to go into Airbnbs, and they were worried about like germs on surfaces. And so we hired him to do this, basically create cleaning and sanitation protocols. But I remember having a conversation with him, and he said something to me. He said, Brian, do you know what the #1 killer in America is? I'm kind of paraphrasing the conversation. And I said, I don't know. Is it like heart disease? Is it cancer? And he goes, no, the #1 killer in America is loneliness. And I said, loneliness? What are you talking about? And he said, yeah, being chronically lonely is worse for your health than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day and can take 15 years off your life. And not only that, but about half of Americans are lonely. 2 out of 3 teenagers by some studies are lonely. And it's not just that they're lonely, it's that this is leading to a lot of mental health issues. 1 in 4 teenagers have suicidal ideations. That's not just teenagers. You see like there's a crisis with men and boys. There's a crisis with like 1 in 3 seniors are lonely. This is like, so I started realizing this is like a really big crisis. It may be a way to say it's a crisis of disconnection. And I started realizing like, global warming, maybe you could say that's disconnection with the earth, and that loneliness is disconnection from each other. And maybe loneliness at the most fundamental level starts with disconnection from yourself, that you're running away from something. And that sometimes trying to be successful in climbing a mountain is running away from something, because you think that what you are isn't enough. And if you become more, you'll become something. And that is the problem, because of course, we never fully leave our history and our psychology. And so then I started learning about loneliness at the intellectual level and started asking, well, Airbnb is a global community. We have hundreds of millions of people. Some of the best ways to connect with other people are through travel. I was using travel and Airbnb to like connect with my friends because most of them didn't even live in the same city as me. I started realizing, you get to my age, you're 41, you have a public company, you have a couple of choices. You can just stop and say like retire. You can do something new, or you can just say, my work is just getting started. And for me, like, I want to like keep getting a return for shareholders and make sure like if people give me money, they feel like it was a good decision. If employees put their trust in me, it was a good career decision. And I want all that to happen, but that can't be enough. That there's got to be something more. The artist in me, the designer in me wants to solve a problem. The problem can't just be a stock price. It's got to be something greater. And I have like one of the biggest canvases in the world of any designer ever. And what I want to design is not products, I want to design connections between people. And so I started learning about loneliness. I started realizing that modern life seems to be making people lonely. And there's all sorts of theories. Maybe it's that like, everything is digitized now. The mall is now Amazon, the theater is now Netflix, the grocery store is now Instacart, the office is now Zoom. And I'm a proponent of all these things. I use all these services and I love them. But the problem is, it's like ingredients. We evolved, I think, to be in physical proximity with one another. And as we spend more time online, we seem to be spending less time together. And I think we have to be very, very careful as a society what kind of future we want to design for ourselves. So I guess for me, loneliness in its solution, which is reconnection, has been both a personal mission and now a bit of a professional mission. And a product or a service can't help with that, but a community can. And if Airbnb can go from a travel service to a travel community, if we can be in the business of trust, where you understand one another and we can help you connect with people in your life or meet other people, that to me would be where the next chapter is. And there's something about like solving your own problem and then wanting to like, trying to spread it to others is, I think, one of the most fulfilling things. They always say the best way to start a business is solve your own problem.